The sun was fading fast behind the hills of Redwater County, casting long shadows across the aging barn. Dust hung heavy in the air, swirling with each boot step on the wooden floor. Inside, the auction ring was nearly empty, just a few tired ranchers and buyers lingering out of habit, not hope. The last lot of the day was led in quietly. A frail, mud-covered horse with a coat that had once been a proud chestnut but now looked faded and forgotten. The animal's ribs pressed tightly against its skin, and a fresh scar ran across its flank. It didn't resist the rope. It had no fight left. Colton Densmore, the auctioneer, shifted on his boots and gave a half-hearted call. His deep southern drawl carried over the tinny speakers. "All right, folks, last one for today. Let's make this quick." His hand hovered over the gavel. No one raised a hand. No one spoke. The horse stood alone, barely breathing, head hanging low. Colton cleared his throat, already preparing to end it. But just as he lifted the gavel, a soft voice cracked through the silence. "Wait, please." Heads turned. A girl stood near the edge of the crowd, barely more than a silhouette against the dying light that filtered through the barn doors. Her name was Tessa Bramble, and her voice trembled like it hadn't been used in days. Her green flannel shirt was stained with dirt, and her boots were scuffed raw. But it was her eyes, wild, wide, and brimming with tears, that made the crowd freeze. Colton blinked, confused. "Ma'am?" he asked, lowering the gavel slightly. Tessa stepped forward, hands clenched tightly. "Don't let him go," she said. "I know that horse." A quiet tension rippled through the ring. Even the few buyers who remained paused, curiosity replacing boredom. From the far corner of the barn, an older woman whispered, "Isn't that Gideon McKellar's girl?" Another replied softly, "No, she's Bramble. That family left years ago." Whispers stirred like wind through wheat fields. Tessa ignored them. Her eyes stayed locked on the horse. The animal, unmoving just moments before, lifted its head slowly. Its eyes met hers. Something passed between them. Recognition, memory, pain. And in that moment, Colton Densmore hesitated. For a moment, no one moved. The silence inside the auction barn felt heavy, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Colton Densmore stared at Tessa, the gavel still in his hand but frozen midair. He had called auctions for 30 years and had seen all kinds of desperate people, but there was something different about the girl in front of him. Something raw and aching. Tessa took a step closer to the ring. Her voice was steadier now, but still soft. "His name's Whiskey Jack," she said, nodding toward the horse. "He used to belong to my mama." That name, Whiskey Jack, hung in the air like a ghost. Colton's brow furrowed, and some of the older men along the fence exchanged looks. The horse gave a weak nicker, as if recognizing the sound of his own name after all these years. Colton finally set the gavel down on the podium. "This horse was brought in yesterday by the county. No papers, no brand, no name. How do you know he's yours?" His tone wasn't accusing, just tired. He'd seen too many folks make claims they couldn't prove. Tessa swallowed hard and reached into her coat pocket, pulling out a small, creased photograph. She walked up and handed it to him with shaking fingers. Colton took the photo and held it to the fading light. It showed a younger Tessa, maybe 7 or 8 years old, standing beside a younger version of the horse. Her mother was crouched beside her, smiling, one hand on the reins. In the background, a white fence and a red barn, clear signs of the old Bramble property just outside of town. Colton's eyes softened. "That barn burned down 10 years ago," he murmured. Tessa nodded slowly. "She died in that fire," Tessa whispered. "But Whiskey Jack got out. We couldn't find him after. I was taken in by foster care. Moved around. I didn't think I'd ever see him again." Her voice cracked on the last word. The buyers were no longer looking at the horse. They were looking at her. Even the most hardened among them had fallen silent. Then, quietly, from behind Colton, someone said, "That horse's eyes, they remember her." It was June Adele Carrigan, the oldest woman in town, and one who believed more in the heart than in bloodlines. Everyone turned to see her step forward, her cane tapping against the wooden floor. She looked at Tessa, then at the horse. Some things find their way back, even when the world says they shouldn't. Tessa stood quietly as June Carrigan's words settled into the air like dust. The crowd, which had moments on Tess been only mildly curious, now watched with a quiet reverence. Even Colton Densmore, the hardened auctioneer who had seen too many broken horses and broken people, couldn't quite bring himself to speak. He looked again at the photo in his hand. The child in the picture had the same determined eyes as the young woman before him. Eyes full of loss, but also something else. Fight. "I don't want charity," Tessa said suddenly, her voice firmer now. "I don't want sympathy. I just want to take him home." Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for the rope tied to Whiskey Jack's halter. The horse didn't flinch. He took one slow step toward her, then another, until his head gently rested against her chest. A soft sob escaped her lips as she wrapped her arms around his neck. Colton cleared his throat and took off his hat, running a calloused hand through his graying hair. "He's still county property," he said carefully. "Technically, he's marked for slaughter if not sold by sundown." His voice wasn't cruel, just real. Rules were rules. Tessa didn't blink. "How much?" she asked, eyes locked on his. Colton hesitated. "Well, he's in rough shape. No one's bidding. If you got $50, he's yours." A quiet shuffle came from behind. Bo Thaddeus Merritt, a younger man with rolled-up sleeves and a veterinarian's badge on his truck outside, stepped forward. "I'll cover it," he said simply, "and I'll check him over for free." Tessa turned to look at him, unsure whether to thank him or push him away. But Bo didn't wait for gratitude. He just knelt beside the horse and began checking his hooves. Whiskey Jack shifted slightly, but stayed calm. "He's dehydrated and underfed, but he's got some life in him," Bo muttered. "Looks like he's been surviving on scraps for a while." Tessa knelt beside him. Her fingers brushed the scar on Whiskey Jack's flank. It hadn't been there before. "What happened to you?" she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. June Carrigan, still standing nearby, leaned on her cane and spoke softly. "Some scars don't come from fire," she said. "Some come from being forgotten." The words struck Tessa in a place she had tried to bury for years. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like running. Tessa led Whiskey Jack out of the auction barn with slow, careful steps, the rope loosely wrapped around her hand. The late afternoon sun cast long orange streaks across the gravel lot, and the old horse walked beside her like he'd known her all his life. Behind them, the crowd began to disperse, but not before throwing a few sideways glances, not just at the horse, but at her. Redwater hadn't seen a Bramble Anas, eo nome ainda carregava peso. Bo Merritt walked beside her in silence. He didn't press her with questions, just offered quiet support. When they reached his pickup truck, he opened the back gate and helped guide Whiskey Jack into the makeshift trailer he used for emergency rescues. As he fastened the straps, he finally spoke. "You got a place to take him?" Tessa hesitated, then looked up at him. "My grandfather's old house. If it's still standing." Bo raised an eyebrow. "You mean the one off Willow Creek Road?" She nodded. "I've been gone a long time," she added. "But that place, it's where I need to be right now." Bo didn't argue. He closed the gate, climbed into the truck, and offered her the passenger seat without a word. She got in, and they drove in silence, the hum of the engine filling the spaces where conversations might have been. But not everyone was quiet. Across town, in the corner booth of Ellie's diner, two older men sipped coffee and watched the sunset through the dusty windows. One of them, Sheriff Dale Morgan, leaned back with a creak of leather and muttered, "You hear who's back?" The other, Henry Lawson, a former deputy, didn't look up. Saw her. Looks just like her mother. Same eyes. Same trouble. Dale grunted. If she starts poking around that old fire again, it's gonna stir up more than memories. Meanwhile, back on Willow Creek Road, the truck came to a stop in front of a broken-down wooden fence. The house beyond it was overgrown and weather-beaten, but it stood, barely. Tessa stepped out, staring at the porch where she once sat with her mother, brushing Whiskey Jack's mane in the summer heat. A lump rose in her throat. "He remembers this place," she whispered, watching as the horse poked his head out of the trailer and gave a quiet nicker. She did too. What neither of them knew was that not everyone in Redwater wanted those memories dug up, because the truth about what happened the night of the fire wasn't buried deep enough. The front door creaked open with a sound like bones snapping. Tessa stepped inside slowly, her boots stirring dust that hadn't been moved in years. The air was thick with mildew, scorched wood, and something colder, memory. Time had not been kind to the Bramble house. The wallpaper was peeled back in curling sheets, the ceiling sagged in the corners, and a charred black stain stretched up one side of the stairwell like a shadow burned into the walls. Whiskey Jack snorted from outside. Bo Merritt stood near him, arms crossed. "You sure it's safe to stay here?" he called. Tessa nodded without turning around. "Safe enough." She walked deeper into the house, her fingers brushing the edge of a dusty frame on the wall. Inside it, barely visible through the grime, was a photo of her mother, Clara, holding her as a baby. Her mother's smile was soft, but her eyes were sharp, watchful. In what used to be the kitchen, Tessa opened a warped cabinet door. Inside, she found a small tin box, rusted shut. She pried it open with a broken knife and found letters, dozens of them, bundled with string. Most were from her grandfather, written in neat, stern handwriting. But others were different, unsigned, with phrases that sent a chill down her spine. "They can't find out. Burn everything. No one can ever know." Outside, Bo walked Whiskey Jack around the yard, letting him graze what little grass had grown back over the years. He paused when he saw an old burn pit behind the house, half filled with debris. Among the ashes and broken glass, he spotted something odd, a metal badge, half melted. He bent down, brushed the soot away, and turned it over. Sheriff's star. Number still visible. His jaw tightened. Back inside, Tessa flipped through the letters, one by one. Her heart pounded as the words slowly came together like a puzzle she hadn't realized was even there. Her mother hadn't just died in the fire, she'd been afraid of something. Or someone. There was mention of a meeting with Sheriff Dale Morgan. Of a secret tied to the land. Of witnesses. She looked up, a tremor running through her. Then a knock. Sharp. 3 hard raps against the front door. Tessa froze. Her fingers clutched the letters tight against her chest. She hadn't told anyone she was staying here. Bo was still out back. Whoever was at the door had come with purpose. And they weren't just here to say welcome home. Tessa's breath caught as she approached the door, her hand hovering just above the rusted handle. The letters were still clutched tightly in her other hand, her knuckles white. Through the warped glass pane, she could make out the shape of a man, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a tan coat and a dark hat pulled low. Whoever he was, he didn't knock again. He simply stood there, as still as a statue, waiting. She opened the door just an inch. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice flat. The man lifted his head slightly. It was Sheriff Dale Morgan. His face, weathered and unreadable, held no smile. "Heard you were back," he said. Thought I'd come by and see if everything's all right. His eyes drifted past her, toward the inside of the house, toward the place where secrets were still smoldering. Tessa didn't move. I'm fine. Her tone didn't invite conversation. Dale shifted his weight, hands on his belt. Lot of memories tied to this place, he said. Some better left alone. She narrowed her eyes. You were the first on the scene the night of the fire, weren't you? Dale didn't blink. I was. Silence stretched between them. Finally, he added, Fire Marshal ruled it accidental. Faulty wiring. But something in his voice lacked conviction. I found letters, she said. It was a gamble, but she needed to see his reaction. My mother wrote things. About you. About this land. That did it. Just a flicker in his expression. Barely noticeable, but there. A tightening of the jaw. A subtle shift in posture. Be careful with half-truths, Miss Bramble, he said softly. They're heavier than you think. Without another word, Dale tipped his hat and walked away. Tessa watched him disappear down the gravel drive, her pulse racing. She turned and closed the door, sliding the bolt shut. The quiet inside felt thicker now, like the house itself was holding its breath again. She walked back into the kitchen and spread the letters across the table, her fingers tracing each line. In the backyard, Bo walked into view, carrying something wrapped in an old towel. Found this near the burn pit, he said, unwrapping it. Inside was the partially melted sheriff's badge. Tessa stared at it, blood draining from her face. He was here, she whispered. That night. Before the fire. Bo looked up at her, his face suddenly serious. Tessa, I think someone set that fire on purpose. And for the first time, she knew this wasn't just about a horse. It was about why her mother had died, and who had made sure the truth was never told. The next morning arrived wrapped in a heavy fog that clung to the trees like secrets. Tessa sat at the old kitchen table, the stack of letters spread out before her, now organized by date. Her eyes were swollen from lack of sleep. She had spent most of the night rereading each note, tracing every word as if her mother were speaking directly to her from the grave. The writing grew more frantic toward the end. There were warnings, names, and fear, so much fear. Bo stepped into the room quietly, 2 mugs of coffee in hand. He placed one beside her and sat across the table. You been up all night? She nodded without looking up. My mom was trying to tell someone, she said, about something she found out. Something to do with the sheriff and this land. She pushed a letter toward him. She wrote this 2 days before the fire. She says someone came to the house. That they threatened her. Bo scanned the note, his brow furrowing. The initials HL are written here, he said. Could be Henry Lawson. He was Dale's deputy back then, right? Tessa nodded. He and Dale were always close. My mom trusted neither of them. She paused, then added, she kept writing about a land deal, something illegal. She said they were forging documents, stealing property from families who had no way to fight back. Bo leaned back in his chair, shaking his head. That's a serious accusation. Tessa looked up, eyes burning. And now she's dead. And they ruled it an accident. The truth tasted bitter in her mouth. It had been buried with her mother for years, and now it was clawing its way to the surface. She wasn't ready to stop. Not now. Outside, the sound of hooves echoed through the fog. Whiskey Jack was pacing the yard, ears twitching, unsettled. Tessa stood and walked to the window. A black truck sat at the end of the drive, engine off, driver inside. Watching. Her stomach dropped. Someone's out there, she said, voice low. Bo moved to the window beside her, jaw tightening. That's Lawson's truck. Tessa turned to him. They know I've been reading the letters. Her voice didn't tremble this time. She was scared, but she was also done hiding. We need proof. Real proof. Bo nodded. Then we go to where the records are. The county archives. Tessa grabbed the letters and stuffed them in her bag. As she stepped outside, the fog thickened. Whiskey Jack stood still, watching the truck in the distance. So did Tessa, because now she knew her mother hadn't died in a fire. She had been silenced. The county records office sat at the edge of Redwater, a squat brick building that hadn't changed since the 1970s. Inside, it smelled of old paper, mildew, and something heavier, like truth left too long in the dark. Tessa and Bo entered quietly, their footsteps muffled by cracked linoleum. The clerk behind the counter, a thin man with a clipboard and nicotine-stained fingers, barely glanced up. "Records are public," he grunted. "Just sign in." They didn't waste time. Tessa went straight to the property deeds section, while Bo focused on land transfer files. The air was still and thick, the sound of rustling folders and turning pages the only noise between them. Hours passed. Nothing obvious surfaced, until Tessa opened a file marked Bramble, Clara. Her heart jumped. Inside was a property transfer, but it was dated 2 weeks before the fire. And the signature wasn't her mother's. "Bo," she whispered, holding up the document. "This is forged. I know her handwriting." He took the file, brows furrowed. It says she transferred the land to Dale Morgan. This was never reported in court records. He looked up at her, eyes wide. "They stole it. They used the fire to cover it up." Tessa nodded slowly, her hands shaking. "They killed her for it." Then, from the corner of the room, the door creaked open. A familiar voice echoed down the hallway. "Looking for something, Miss Bramble?" It was Henry Lawson, his tone casual, but his eyes cold. He took a slow step forward. "You really should have stayed gone." Tessa's breath caught in her chest. Bo moved slightly in front of her. Henry's hand rested near his jacket pocket. "Now, I can't let you walk out of here with stolen documents." Bo raised his voice. "These aren't stolen. They're public, and they prove everything." Henry smiled thinly. "And who's gonna believe you?" He took another step forward. Suddenly, from behind him, another voice cut through the tension. "I will." It was June Carrigan, standing in the doorway with a cane in one hand and a phone in the other. "And I just sent pictures of those documents to the county attorney." Henry turned, startled. For a moment, he looked smaller, older. Then, without a word, he turned and walked out. Tessa exhaled shakily. Bo placed a hand on her shoulder. "You okay?" She nodded. "Not yet, but we're close." She looked down at the paper still in her hand. Her mother's stolen land, now a piece of evidence. But just as they began to pack the files, June's expression changed. "You'll need more than paper," she said softly, "because Sheriff Morgan won't let this end quietly." The sky over Redwater turned a strange, bruised shade of gray as Tessa stood once again at the porch of the old Bramble house. The folder com os documentos roubados e a assinatura forjada estava msua mau, protegida como se fos vida. Inside, Whiskey Jack paced nervously in his paddock, ears twitching. He felt it. Something was coming. Bo parked his truck at the edge of the yard and stepped out cautiously. "County attorney's reviewing the files," he said. "And June swore she'd testify if it goes to court." Tessa nodded, but her eyes didn't leave the horizon. "That man destroyed everything we had. He thinks this land belongs to him now. He won't let go easily." Her voice was calm, but Bo could hear the storm beneath it. Night fell quickly, too quickly. As darkness swallowed the last light, The hum of an engine echoed from the road. Headlights appeared, then cut off. Silence. Tessa tensed. "It's him," she whispered. Bo stepped beside her, flashlight in hand. "Let's stay calm." But the look in her eyes said she hadn't waited 10 years just to stay calm. A truck door slammed. Heavy boots on gravel. Sheriff Dale Morgan emerged from the shadows like a ghost wearing a badge. His voice rang out before he was fully visible. "You've stirred up a lot of trouble, Tessa. That land was worthless until your mother stuck her nose where it didn't belong." Tessa stepped down from the porch, folder in hand. "And that gives you the right to kill her?" she said, voice cracking. "To burn down her house?" Dale didn't answer. He looked at Bo, then at the papers. "You give me those documents," he said coldly, "and we all walk away. No one else needs to get hurt." Bo stepped forward. "She's not giving you anything. It's over." Dale's hand moved to his belt, just a twitch, and suddenly Whiskey Jack let out a wild, piercing whinny that shattered the night air. A second later, the sound of sirens rolled over the hills. Red and blue lights lit the trees in the distance. Dale froze. Tessa stared him down, unflinching. "You didn't cover your tracks well enough this time," she said. "And we're not afraid anymore." Dale turned slowly, hands lifted just slightly as two deputies emerged from the darkness behind him. One of them read him his rights. The sheriff said nothing. Not a word. He simply stared at Tessa, and in that look was a lifetime of secrets finally collapsing. As the lights flickered across the porch and the night began to breathe again, Tessa looked down at the folder in her hands. Justice wasn't finished, but for the first time, it had begun. 2 weeks had passed since the arrest. The once quiet town of Redwater buzzed with headlines, hushed conversations, and a cautious sense of justice. Sheriff Dale Morgan and Henry Lawson were under full state investigation. With the documents and testimony Tessa had brought forward, the truth could no longer be buried beneath ashes and silence. Tessa walked through the field behind the house, where the grass had grown tall and golden again. Whiskey Jack trotted gently beside her, his steps steadier now, his coat beginning to shine with life. His eyes no longer looked haunted. He remembered this land, and so did she. But now, those memories no longer hurt. They grounded her. Clara had left more than pain. She had left a purpose. The Bramble land, nearly stolen, was now legally restored to Tessa's name. The county attorney handed her the deed with a firm handshake and a quiet respect. "Your mother would be proud," he said. Holding that paper, Tessa finally felt something she hadn't known in years. Ownership, not just of the land, but of her story. Bo Merritt pulled up the dirt road in his old truck, same as he had every day since the night it all broke open. But this time, he brought no tools or files. Just 2 cups of coffee and a tired but honest smile. "So," he asked, handing her one, "what happens now?" Tessa looked back at the old house, partly repaired, new windows, fresh fencing around the pasture. "Now," she said softly, "I rebuild what matters. I keep what's worth keeping. And I make sure no one forgets again." Her voice trembled, but she didn't cry. The pain hadn't left her, but it no longer controlled her. For the first time since childhood, she didn't feel alone. On the front porch, a new frame held the old photograph, Tessa and Clara with Whiskey Jack between them, all smiles and sun. Below it, etched into the wood, were the words, "Some things survive the fire." It wasn't just a tribute. It was a truth. As the sun dipped behind the hills, bathing Redwater in a soft amber glow, Tessa sat on the porch with Bo beside her. Whiskey Jack grazed peacefully in the fading light. The wind moved gently through the tall grass, carrying with it a promise. The fire may have stolen the past, but it could not touch what she would build next.